Good morning and happy Saturday, everybody, and welcome into the shop. Well, if you've been following the saga of the Sony STR 6045 circa 1969 to 1972 or 73, you'll know that the more work I do, the worse it gets on the unit. Just to review, the power switch was upside down wired, and there's been a ton of work done inside of this unit, and a lot of it has not been done very well. I've got a tuning circuit that is way out of alignment with the dial here, and you know, we've started to replace some lights and stuff, but now it turns out we got bigger fish to fry on this unit. Specifically, we've got a imbalance in the channels on the output to the speakers, and we'll demonstrate that in a couple minutes. I let this run for a few hours yesterday afternoon in the hopes of letting those capacitors, the big capacitors, the electrolytic capacitors in the unit, kind of reform and get stronger. And initially the right channel was super strong on here, and the left channel was almost inaudible on the unit. So I figured over time, you know, I'll lubricate everything. I've got my deoxit lubricant, dissolves corrosion and everything. Little by little, I was able to bring up that channel, but it's still, you know, at 1/3 of the power of the other channel. So I know I probably have some bad caps in there. And the problem is this unit has been worked on a lot of times before. When I came in, well, let me turn the camera around and I'll show you. I've had the unit open before, but I never really noticed before that this power, the amplifier board in here, is just kind of floating around in here, you know. I mean, I'm like, what the heck is with that? All of these, it looks like all of these set screws on the tuning capacitor have been fiddled with. So I did a little research, and one of the things I've determined is that on these units, well, let me set you up for a demonstration. We'll turn it on. Now I've just, all I have here is, this is the low channel, and you'll say, oh, that sounds pretty good. You've brought that up a lot on there. But the problem is, I've managed to clean up the sound a little bit too. I think some of these electrolytic capacitors reformed a little bit, but I think other ones may just be dried out. But I'll tell you what the bigger problem may be.
And what is amazing to me is that Alien Food always knew all of this. I mean, 2,000 people, there was a cognizant day, and actually some of the stuff that's been discovered was available. You know,
it's sounding a little better, but when I go to hook up and hold on the other speaker here,
but we are a Puritan country, you know. We binge and purge, so we pretend we don't care about food at all until we care about absolutely everything, and then we care about how good it is, and then we want it to be really bad, and we go back and forth about, you know,
so what we have is a huge imbalance in the channels over here. So what I want to do is, let me turn this off for a minute. We have a high probability of shorting something out in this with what we're going to attempt to do. We've got to go down, take down the repair to another level now. We're going to try to remove the power amplifier circuit board from its mounting pins here, and I hope there's enough. Looks like there's enough slack. Everything's made modular here, obviously, by 1969-70, which is a great thing. They followed the Marantz model. But I want to try to remove this board, and I want to give it a very close inspection for the connections. And I also want to touch up the soldering connections, because this Sony STR 6045, one of the big bugaboos of this unit is that it has notoriously poor cold solder and broken solder connections. So that's what I want to try to do, to carefully separate this. Everything's going to be brittle as hell. This board may just break. I don't know. This unit has been so mucked up by it looks like so many people have been inside of it that I'm a little concerned. This might be the death knell for the unit. So I want to make sure that all of my power is unplugged, so there's no power running to the unit whatsoever. And then I'm going to remove the screws here, and I might be able to test some of these components here. But the first thing I want to do is just touch up things. So let me see if I can now remove this board carefully off of the mounting pins here, and get that up and away. And I want to be very careful to keep the power off. And in the meantime, I'll fire up the soldering iron here, and we'll try to get underway. Taking the board, and luckily it's on a really nice length of wiring here, so I'm not really putting any stress on anything. But first thing I want to do is give a visual inspection and make sure that none of the resistors or caps are obviously bulged on this unit. And I don't immediately see anything up front that looks like something catastrophic occurred. But when I look down at the bottom, I see all kinds of potential problems here. If we look over here, I don't want to put too much stress. This board is amazingly brittle. This thing should just crack at any moment here, I'm telling you. If I look over in this area in here, I don't know how you can see that. Try to get a little more light on that. This lost the connection to the board, whatever's coming through there. So there's a lot of really bad solder joints on the bottom. As I say, it looks like somebody has really done a number. You can see somebody's been here on that particular. So we've got to make sure when we're touching up these solder connections that we don't short anything out. Okay, we don't bridge any connections, or it's immediately game over, and then we just have to part this unit out for junk. So there's our power supply board over there. So we'll see. I'm just thinking the problem is in this board right here. So I'm waiting for the iron to get heated up, and we'll go around and carefully try to touch up some of these points here, and that might help a bit. Gotta let this iron get a little hotter here. Okay, I'm just swinging down the board from side to side, just heating up and reflowing these points. I'm being very careful here. I don't want to slide across the board and create any shorts here, but I want to reflow this solder so that it's bright. Takes a minute or two, but we'll get much better connectivity in here when we do this. This area is a mess in here. Making very sure not to short or bridge any connections. Make sure that's bubbling real good there. That looks pretty good. Let's make sure there's absolutely no bridging. Good space. So what I also like to do is periodically start the unit. Let me turn the power on here. Oh, I think we lost our power over here. All right, let me check that. Oh, sorry about that.
We are back at the table. I'm Clark Wolf, and I'm here with Karen Page and Andrew Dunnenberg. They are author.
Now the reason I do that is that I know what area I've just worked in, so where I have a problem, and I may have a chance to recover it. If I just do the whole board and I don't periodically test, I don't know which area to look that I might have a bridged connection or so. You want to work intelligently when you're doing this kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to continue working the board here. At times I need to reflow a little bit of solder too. Some of these, okay? I'm just making our way around the board. I don't have my good soldering iron. I don't know where. I think I lent it to somebody in the neighborhood, so it's real slow going. But everything's getting nice and shiny and bright here, so that's indicative of a non-cold solder joint. All right, let's give it a whirl.
Although when we've written about flavors from around the world, we did consult with
Okay, so that really hasn't made too much of a difference. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go through and I'm going to recap this board. And this is something I don't like to do too often, and I'll tell you why. Now when I'm talking about recapping, I'm talking about removing the electrolytic capacitors that you see on the board here and then replacing them with modern ones. Now the reason I'm always a little hesitant to do that is for a very specific reason. The unit, to me, these are like fine wine, and these are, over time they mellow, the capacitors take on a certain audio patina, in my opinion, and to me it gives a richer sound the older. I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but the sound seems better, and when you start to replace it, you seem to get tinny sounds and things. So generally it's like a last resort thing for me. Now these are Elna capacitors, and you will know that I really love Elna capacitors. I think that they're the top quality bits. We have to be very careful here that these electrolytics, they have a positive side and a negative side. And it's critical that these be put down properly on the board. So I am going to take a quick picture of this, because you never know, and that way I will get the alignment correct. So we'll be okay. We have our desoldering gun here, which will help us to remove them without doing a lot of damage there. Okay, I'm gonna get a few pictures. Okay, that does a pretty good job. We want to be careful busting these off the board, because that's in fact what we might get, is busting here. So I want to be very careful to remove every trace of that. This is like a vacuum unit that vacuums off that solder. And I'm going to be retesting one at a time. Now, one of the problems with Elna and a lot of manufacturers is they like to glue these to the board too. So I have to be very careful to get a knife and kind of break that away from the board. I don't want to snap. I can't tell you again how brittle this board is. It's terrible. So what I'd like to do is kind of wiggle it a little bit and then remove that solder, and this should kind of wiggle out. I'm just going to take a screwdriver and just work it in there and kind of help it a little bit. But if it snaps, it's game over for the whole unit. Okay, so carefully working that out. Got one leg out. I'm probably going to have to work this onto it. Oops. To get that other leg removed, and there it goes. Okay. So we've got that removed. This is a 50 volt 100 microfarad, and we have I have 63 volt here, which I have some hundreds and stuff around here too. I got a zillion of them, but I like to keep them matched up. So I'm going to go ahead and replace one at a time here. These are much smaller in size. If you look at a size comparison, what the difference is now between size is amazing. So this is a they're both 100 microfarad. This one is 63 volt rated, which is higher. You can always use a higher voltage. You should not use a lower one. Okay, so we're going to replace one at a time on here. Alright, here goes our first one. We got it mounted. I'm going to make sure to get a good connection on that, not have that flop over like it just did. Okay, so the first one is remounted. We'll let that cool off for a minute. Being very careful to respect the polarity on that. Okay. All right. Now remember, each time I do replace one, I'm going to test and make sure this unit's still working. The reason I don't like people recapping and stuff is it usually becomes a disaster. They'll recap the whole thing and then they have no idea where they screwed up. They'll recap the whole receiver, and they have no idea where the problem lies, and then it's game over. So one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. Okay? Alright, we got the back row of recapping done. I think it makes a big difference in the volume. So we're going to go ahead and try to recap the rest of the board now. That really went really well. Remember, when you're doing a recap, do one at a time and do the testing, okay? Otherwise, you're just asking for problems here. So we have, I probably have the rest of the caps to do the board. We're looking at a 10 volt, 220 microfarads here on the side. So I'll go try to grab them right now. Ooh, that baby's booming in now. We just got to clean up that sound some. So, okay. Onward, started capping the back here. Remember, one at a time. And when you go to clip the leads off, make very sure that you don't drop the leads down inside the unit. I've seen that. If I've seen it once, I've seen it 20 times, okay? Be very careful. Don't lose it at the finish line, okay? Go ahead and recap the power supply board too. So might as well just do everything while I'm down here, and I'm going to touch up these connections down here. This board has now been complete. I really don't feel like the need to replace some of the small ones, but the big ones, the bigger value capacitors, yes, but the small ones I may or may not. This one looks a little bulgy here, so probably do that. But let me go ahead and do the knock out the power supply board real quick, okay? Got a really good supply of electrolytics here, so no problem at all kinds of values. 1050 volts. Yeah, this is 1025. This is actually a 220 here, so we're going to go ahead and grab the 220s and pop that in. Okay, the power supply board has also been recapped, as you can see, so that's good to go. And the last thing I really want to do today, I want to touch up some of these transistors here. I want to be careful. I don't want to hold the heat on too long on these connections, or you can damage some of these older transistors. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just touch up some of these connections here.
Isn't too far away. I know I'm...
Well, I was born in a small town. The emblem of La France, our country, is a roster. So the emblem of Chateau of France.
The bull.
36, 36, 86.
I can't remember who wrote the book. Somebody wrote a cookbook. It was called I Hate to Cook book. And I could write a similar book for electronics called I Hate to Recap vintage audio gear, choosing instead to keep things as original as possible, even down to components. I'm not saying don't replace parts that need replacing, but don't be a part changer just for the sake of changing parts. You're going to find out you're a little too eager to do stuff, and you're going to get in there and you're going to short stuff, and you're going to get things the wrong way. So we ended up I'm not sure how many we did all together. We ended up replacing. Let me grab this one before that becomes a little troublemaker down there. Not sure how many we replaced all together, but it was a lot. We ended up doing the power supply board as well as the amplifier board, and somewhere in there without a lot of hassle we were able to determine that one of the capacitors was not functioning properly, and when we popped the new one in, the unit just took off and ran great. So, you know, step by step, if I don't get what I want, lubricating controls, then I have to move into components and checking components and getting down on board level and things like that. Well, I do have some lamps on the way. Keep your fingers crossed they come this week, and maybe we can wrap up the project. Thanks for being along for part 3 of the Sony STR 6045 rebuild and restoration. Yes, it was a long one today, and it's not something that I do too often, but it worked out well. All right, thanks so much for being along. Your thumbs up are appreciated. We still got a ways to go on this project. Thanks, everyone.